Welcome to the final chapter in my Friday the 13th review series, not the fraudulent imposter version of the final chapter starring Crispin Glover and Corey Feldman. No, I mean the real deal, the genuine article, last in the series, at least until the lawsuit gets resolved, which is not going to happen in my lifetime or the lifetime of my kids. And this '09 remake promised to be a real return to form, a back to basics affair, no spaceships, no mashups, no body swapping, no Frank Sinatra, and no wannabe Carrie Whites. But that's not to say that the film didn't have ambition. This film isn't just remaking the original in its own image. By my count, it takes elements from the first 5 Friday the 13th films and then puts them all together in a weird kind of hybrid mega mix of past Jason films. So from the first film, it takes this idea of showing us Pamela Voorhees getting beheaded. That's how the '09 film kicks off. From the second film, it takes the idea of Jason killing people but not yet having acquired his hockey mask. From the third film, it takes the idea of Jason actually getting hold of the hockey mask. So it's condensed the elements from those 2 films, 2 and 3. From the fourth film, it takes the idea of having a guy turning up at Crystal Lake looking for his sister or trying to get revenge for his sister. And from the fifth film, and I'm playing a bit fast and loose with this one, we take the idea of Jason dying at the end on farm equipment. So does all this mean that this is the biggest, baddest Friday the 13th movie of them all? No, but you knew I was going to say that. I've seen this movie 4 times, always at the end of a Friday marathon. I've never watched it out of sequence. I always used to think it was quite average, but this week, this film has sadly befallen the same fate for me that Jason 10 did when I reviewed it a couple of weeks ago. Another film that I used to think was quite average, but as soon as I cast my more analytical eye over proceedings, it became something of a much poorer film for me. And the same thing has happened to this reboot film. But I'm going to start my laundry list of complaints today with the one thing which used to really piss me off, even back when I thought the film was okay, and that's this idea of Jason kidnapping people. For me, it's just totally wrong that he does that in this film. You know, taking a woman back to these Viet Cong tunnels that he's got. It's just not the character for me. For me, Jason is like the ghosts in Pac-Man. You know, you touch him, you're dead. Unless you're a final girl, in which case different rules apply. But what he does in this film, it's just not Jason Voorhees. It feels like something from like a Wrong Turn film or some other kind of hillbilly horror. It's just a no, no, no from me. But if the kidnapping thing could be said to be the dagger to my heart, which ensured from first viewing that I was never going to be a massive fan of this film, the characters have been like the slow acting poison, killing off my senses more gradually across all 4 viewings. I will make an exception for the 2 leads, Jenna and Clay, played by Jared Padalecki and Danielle Panabaker. I know both of those guys from watching them in other things. Padalecki, I know from Supernatural, and he's basically playing the same character here as he does in that, Sam Winchester. You know, pretend that he's looking for Dean instead of his sister, and you basically got Sam, which is fine. I love Sam Winchester. Danielle Panabaker is playing, again, the same character she normally plays, the sort of down-to-earth girl next door, but that's fine. She's very good at that. But once we move past those 2, all the other characters in the movie are just completely nondescript to the point that they're not actually characters, or they're just annoying. And I'm mainly talking about the guys at the summer house in the main portion of the movie. I guess some of the characters from the prologue section, that quintet at the beginning, they're okay. Trent has a reputation among Friday fans as being the worst of the worst in this film, but I don't think he's the worst of all these very bad characters, mainly because he actually does have some character. And there are moments where I don't think Trent is that bad. So when everybody turns up at the summer house, he sort of berates his friends for putting their feet on the coffee table and stuff. I'm with him in that moment. You know, go around to somebody's house, respect it. Don't put your dirty feet on the table. And this shows me that even though Trent is from money, he has a silver spoon, he at least seems to respect the value of money. And there's a moment not far past that when he and Jenna are stood down near a stream somewhere and he sort of reaches for her midriff, but he's not too forceful with that. He's sort of playful, he's bashful, he's not being too imposing on her personal space. He's all right in that moment, but just for the way he treats Clay at the gas station throughout the rest of the movie, I guess makes him an arsehole. But I don't think he's completely as bad as his reputation. But all of his friends, I mean, there's just nothing there. None of these guys have personalities. All the script writing that's been done for them is really stunted. None of the dialogue seems to flow very well. Every other line is just about sex or bongs or some weird racial joke. I'm a bit confused about the relationship between Trent and Jenna. It says on the Wikipedia page for this film that they are a couple, yet I see no evidence of that in the film. It's really confusing. There's not a single moment where they kiss each other or hold hands. None of the other characters refer to them as a couple. That moment where Trent reaches for Jenna's waist, you could easily interpret that as just some guy who's been flirting with that girl for quite some time. She's used to it by now, but she continues to pull away because she's not convinced they would make a great girlfriend and boyfriend. Now, the reason why this is important is because later in the film, when Trent goes to bed with Bree, it feels like a moment that should be quite heavy. It should be important. It should be like, oh, what's going to happen now? But actually, nothing, because Trent and Bree just act like two single people, you know, without any responsibility to anybody else. And when Jenna comes back to the house, she doesn't seem worried that Trent's holed up in this bedroom. Trent and Bree don't seem remotely worried that they could be about to hurt anybody. It's all confused. So either Wiki is completely wrong, or this film just does not do a very good job of showing us what the current status is between all these characters. As for the two nerdy guys, I think they're meant to be endearing, but they're not. My abiding memory of them in this is just of them sat around with their bongs and they're being all whiny and wanky. The two people who go off to the lake to go on the speedboat, there's no character there either. But going back to Brie, I think she's actually the worst character of all because she's in this story for the longest time and yet she contributes nothing. I don't think there's a single line of dialogue which comes out of her mouth which is of relevance to anything going on. She basically stands around a lot, grins, dances, screws, and dies. That's it. She's an image in this film. She's not actually a character. I don't know what people think of all the sex and nudity in this film, by the way. I don't mind seeing that stuff in a film, but I think you have to earn it. I think if Friday the 13th, the final chapter, had had all the sex and nudity of this film, it would have felt more appropriate because in the case of that film, it would have felt more like the sprinkles on top of an already fat juicy cake, whereas in the 2009 reboot there just isn't that solid foundation there. I could easily imagine whoever wrote this film actually put sex, nudity and violence as their first thing on the page before they even came up with a story, as if they were just wanting to tick off boxes for the late noughties demographic. I don't think you should write the film that way. And consider this, if I've got my count wrong, correct rather, which I think I have, there are more principal females in this film who get their tits out than principal females who don't. Now just let that sink in for a moment. But if we move on to something a bit more positive, the opening prologue is a good section. It does have a really decent reputation, although even with that there are some things about it which trouble me. So I mean, it goes on for too long. I think it's about 20 minutes. Seriously, cut it down to 11, 12, 13 minutes so we can get on with the rest of the film. And I don't think Clay's sister is front and center enough at the start of this film, given the fact that she's the only connective tissue between the prologue and the rest of the movie. If you think of the original Friday the 13th, imagine if Annie had been kidnapped instead of killed and then she'd have popped up later on. It would have been a case of, oh yes, that Australian chick is still alive, she was awesome and now she's back. I don't get that feeling with Clay's sister. I can't remember her name. Is it Lisa? I'm not entirely sure, but when she pops up again and it turns out she's just been captured by Jason, I feel nothing. I'm not even sure if I recognised her the first time I saw this film. I think Clay had to sort of inform me as to who it was. And I'm going into spoiler territory now for the end of this film. You have been warned. 3, 2, 1. So I really don't like it that Clay's sister survives this film, but Jenna doesn't. It just feels completely wrong. I just don't think Clay's sister has earned the right to survive this film. She's basically cheated the rules of Jason. Now, I know that Jason sort of comes up at the end and gets her, but I don't think that actually happens. I think that's a breaking the fourth wall thing, a bit similar to the end of I Know What You Did Last Summer and to a lesser extent, Sinister. So, moving towards my conclusion, I'm all for a film series going back to basics, but there's doing that and then there's just being basic and boring. I mean, you get some good kills in this. I particularly like the one with the sleeping bag hanging over the campfire. And if it wasn't for the fact that that was surely quite difficult to film, I would have said that the whole prologue in this feels like its own separate 20-minute fan film. Maybe they could have called it Never Hike in the Weed Fields or something like that. So yeah, you get some good kills. There's titillation if that's your thing. There's a half decent Jason played by Derek Mears, I think his name is. He has a good physicality, but like I said, I don't like the kidnapping thing. Character wise, you get two great leads, and then everybody else is just completely atrocious. It just feels like this film is a bit soulless to me. It just doesn't have much personality in its DNA. It doesn't have those little flourishes, which the first few films in this series really do. So yeah, I'm not the world's biggest fan of it. Let's get to the bag of terror though and find out what sort of score we have. So we've got 1, 2 bloody axes out of 5. That is a less than average score. But to be honest, I feel like I could have given this film even less. That maybe I'm propping this film up a little bit just because I'm a fan of the series. I don't consider this to be much better than, say, the Child's Play remake or the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. Two films I absolutely did not like, and I think I gave those films like 1 or 1.5. I can't remember. But on the positive side, we have now reached the end of my Friday the 13th review series. I think I've been doing this for about 6 months now since I reviewed the original film. I have gone very slow. It's nice to get to the end. I do love this series, but to sit here now and think to myself, I've done it. I finished all 12 films. That is a really nice feeling. I've now reviewed what I would consider to be the 5 main franchises in horror. I think so. I've done Friday, Halloween, Child's Play, Texas Chainsaw, and Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I think I'm going to concentrate on finishing my Resident Evil review series, I think, before I decide where I'm going to go after this. So there we have it. That was my review for the 2009 remake of Friday the 13th. I'll be back with another review very soon. Until next time, cheerio.